Just how does it feel to be back, and just how are you feeling physically?
Yeah, no, I'm pumped to be back. I feel really good, really good. 100%. Had all off season to recover and get where I wanted to be, and I'm there, and everything feels really good.
Anything specifically that you did this off season so that you can get to that 100%? Anything different or new?
I think with the lower injury, just focus more on like flexibility, mobility. I'm not getting any younger, so I think that's really important, and just honing in on that. And then like I said, got to work pretty early. Hitting wise, working on a few things to get to where I know I can be.
Sitting where you are right now, when you reflect back to last year, what do you take away from it, and what do you want the focal point for this team to be going into this year?
I'd say number one thing is be healthy. I think that's important, and then I think a lot of us would like to put ourselves in better situations, better spots, capitalize on more opportunities. I felt like we had opportunities that last year that just didn't capitalize on. This is a really good group, and we're a good team. One more healthy. So I think just like I said, being ourselves. For me personally, like I said, when I was healthy, obviously the production wasn't where I wanted it to be. But like I said, I think I figured some things out this off season with the swing to put me in a better spot to have a better year. So I'm excited.
How do you assess this organization and this clubhouse right now? Because there's some old pieces, but there's also some new faces in the clubhouse, and Walt taking over in his first year.
Yeah, like I said, I like where we're at. I really do. I think Walt's going to do an unbelievable job. I've said that from the beginning. The knowledge that he has in baseball, and he's adapted to the new style of baseball. So I'm pumped to be able to play behind him, and like I said, I like where we're at as a group.
Can we talk about the adjustments you're making to your swing to like not work? How do you do that? Because I feel like it is all core. So what do you?
No, it's not like to. Yeah, it is my core. So it's not like trying to avoid anything. It's just more, like I said, to me, last year, a little bit in 24, I was kind of getting back to, a little bit of a hip slide. So, I was gaining ground towards the pitcher, and that's kind of losing myself time to see the ball and make later decisions. So just really working on trying to be more stacked in my body. Because like I said, when you look at it, it's like, the way I kind of assessed this past off season was, strikeouts were up, walks were down, damage wasn't there. It's like, okay, why was that? It's like, okay, I was fouling a bunch of pitches off, and in this game, pitchers are so good, and now everybody's except throwing 145 different pitches. You're only going to get one or two pitches in at bat. It's like kept fouling pitches off. Next thing you know, strikeouts. It's like, okay, if I can hone in on where my lower half is and give myself a better opportunity to not miss those pitches, capitalize on those, then then they start getting a little timid to come over the plate, then the walks come up. I think that's, like I said, I feel like if I can do that, I'll kind of get back to the numbers that I'm capable of.
When you're going through the rehab process, is that part of it where you have the opportunity to kind of just sit for a second, kind of think? Is that where kind of the opportunity to be able to really?
Yeah, I had some times to reflect and really dive into it, and working with Tim has been unbelievable. I actually worked with him this off season with the swing, and he dove into 21, 22, 23 when I was really good, and like I said, that's kind of the big issue was just the hip slide and losing ground. So I think, like I said, we worked on that, and like I said, obviously other things to work on, but like I said, I'm really excited about where I'm at.
Do you feel like last year it was kind of like an asterisk? Like you can't really judge this team and the talent from last year just because of everything that kind of happened injury-wise and things like that. Like, do you even look at that hard, or? Well,
I think you can take try to take something from every season. Obviously, the injuries and were a thing. We're not going to not say they weren't, but they were. So and then, like I said, just some things personally that I know I can get better at, and yeah, like I said, I love where I'm at right now. Like I said, this group has got the potential to be really good. So I know everybody else is excited. So am I.
Austin, coming into this, obviously the last couple of years, you guys are coming off playoff appearances and everything like that. Is it different? Is there a different sense of urgency when you guys have the season that you do and don't even make the playoffs early exit? Is there a different feeling when it comes into a season like this?
I think for this group, I think we know we should be there, and we can. I think that's a really good way to look at it. Everybody in this clubhouse knows that we should be in the playoffs and know that we can get there. So I think that mindset going into the season, it's a long season. Everybody knows that, but I think that mindset of everybody's on the same page, knowing that we expect to be in the postseason, and like I say, ready to get it rolling, and we're here.
What is the reaction with the flow, the beers,
reset? Like I said, the last couple of years, obviously, hadn't been what I want, what I know I'm capable of. So, just a little reset for me.
The wife obviously likes it, though.
She does.
Okay. What was your reaction? Did you see Acuna during the halftime performance?
Yeah, I was like not shocked. I know him and Bad Bunny are friends, so I thought it was cool.
What is your just overall expectation of this rotation when healthy? Like, how good do you think they can be?
I mean, you look at Sale, you look at Strider, Lope. Obviously, we got other options. So I mean, I think we're capable, very very capable. Obviously unfortunate what happened to Schwelly, but this team's used to it. We got to keep moving, and it's just one of those things that next guy's gonna have to step up, and we can do that.
Nacho stepped in for you last year a little bit, and now he's getting some reps with the catchers.
Yeah.
What was your perspective?
Hey, good for him. I came up as a left fielder, so obviously he thinks that giving himself any opportunity that he can. So I tell everybody, it's like any way you can get on the field, get on the field.
I've been asking the guys about the automatic ump, right? And
Oh, yeah.
So what is kind of your perspective on that? Ozzy thinks it's great for him being a little shorter, that it'll help him. What is your kind of perspective on it and how you manage it?
I think spring's going to be a really good gauge of it, and just kind of see how it is, because you go through those days where the strike zone, you're like, I know that's a ball, and then you go through days where you see guys that say that's an absolute ball, and it's 2 balls on the plate. So it's going to be I think a little bit of an adjustment. I think the whole goal of the automatic strike zone is just the overwhelming misses. I think umpires have a really hard job, and they do. I think they do a pretty good job at what they do. I think, like I said, the overall goal is just the overwhelming misses. So we'll see. Like I said, I'm get into spring and see how it goes.
Is that something Tim is kind of harping on for you guys? And what is he like as a coach? Like you said, you mentioned worked with him this offseason. We're going to meet him, of course. But what is he like as a coach?
Well, technically the position players hadn't started, so we hadn't had like a full meeting yet. But Tim's been great. He's one of those guys, super calm and never too high, never too low. So it's been unbelievable to work with. Like I said, understanding the game has evolved. From a pitching standpoint, from a hitting standpoint. Guys are throwing 3 different fastballs. 4-seam, 2-seam, cutter. You're getting right on right splits now. So it's like the game's adjusting. So we got to adjust, and he's been really good at that.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Austin.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.